When you start to get involved in what I'm going to call the AFE enthusiast community, you start to notice a lot of patterns. One such pattern is how often people will argue about which tank is/was the best. I see it a lot in the comments of my own videos. Rarely, if ever, do these arguments end with both parties coming to a common conclusion. You could chalk this up to personal bias, or both parties failing to make a convincing argument, but I think it comes down to something else entirely. The more I think about what tank could possibly be the best, I always come to the same conclusion. The best tank in the world doesn't exist. That sounds like a pretty shallow and pseudo-intellectual take on the surface, but allow me to explain myself. You could, theoretically, boil a tank's relative performance down to its base mechanical stats. Stuff like turret traverse rate, armor thickness, armor penetration, power to weight ratio, you get the idea. That's usually what people do when trying to compare two different tanks. However, for these stats to mean a whole lot on their own, you have to assume that this fight is taking place in a vacuum, meaning both crews are the exact same, the environment is a flat plane, and it's just these two tanks fighting each other. No other supporting elements are present. It is possible to draw a winner from this contest, but it's so far removed from reality that it's basically pointless. Even in conflicts between two well-equipped armies, warfare is rarely symmetrical. There are so many variables at play that deciding which tank is best purely based on performance stats just isn't meaningful at all. There have been multiple instances in history where supposedly inferior tanks were able to regularly destroy their more sophisticated counterparts. To help illustrate my point, I'm going to talk about some of the variables that affect how a tank performs in combat. One of the most obvious performance variables is the tank's crew. Crew training is probably what has the greatest effect on a tank's performance, or even survival, in combat. There are some pretty well-known examples of this. For instance, the destruction of Saudi M1 Abrams, or Turkish Leopard 2s. Your tank can have the greatest cannon and most advanced fire control system, but if the gunner doesn't know how to properly use it, it isn't going to make much of a difference. If the loader is clumsy or slow, a target of opportunity could slip from the gunner's hands. If the commander can effectively coordinate the crew, everyone's performance is going to suffer. Additionally, if the crew doesn't know how to properly maintain or repair their vehicle, that's going to lead to even more issues. Crew training isn't the only variable either. What if your crew is tired and can't get enough sleep? What if their kit is too bulky, so it makes it difficult to move around the tank's interior? What if the interior becomes too hot or too cold? All of these are incredibly minute details, but they can have a drastic impact on how combat plays out. Another variable is what supporting elements are available to the tank. It's already well known that in urban combat, tanks suffer massive attrition without infantry support, but it can go further than that. What if a tank wouldn't normally notice that there's an enemy tank in the area, but a friendly plane spots it from above, and directs the tank into an ambush position? The term supporting elements doesn't just refer to combat either. An ample supply of fuel, food, spare parts, and other supplies are essential to keeping a tank in top fighting condition. The environment the tank is operating in is also a huge factor. For example, tanks with diesel or gasoline engines typically have a hard time getting started in cold weather conditions. Tanks with turbine engines don't have this problem. But if a tank with a turbine engine is operating in a dusty environment, the engine will be more difficult to maintain. Intense heat can make some tank engines overheat pretty easily. In the case of something like the Sheridan, a humid environment can also be pretty disastrous. On flat terrain, Soviet-style MBTs are in their element, but in more hilly or mountainous terrain, they would be at a disadvantage. Every tank is affected differently. I think that whether a tank is objectively good or not comes down to a few things. 1. Does it work mechanically? Meaning that the components are reliable and function as intended. 2. Can the crew use it effectively? Meaning that the tank is ergonomic and the crew is well trained. 3. Does it fit within the doctrine of the nation using it? Which means that the tank meshes well with other elements, and it works on both a tactical and strategic level. If so, it's an objectively good tank. People like to joke about those up-armored technicals being the tanks of Middle Eastern conflicts, but honestly, if whoever is using it can make a lot of them, and they work well enough, then I don't see much to laugh at. The Bradley and BMP are a good example of my reasoning. To fans of Soviet armor, the Bradley is way too big overall. To fans of Western armor, the BMP is way too small. So both parties act like the other vehicle is just the worst thing ever, when in reality, they are both well designed for the doctrine they belong to. The BMP wasn't really designed for comfort, it was designed to survive as long as possible. So while heavily armed and low profile, the troop compartment is cramped, and it doesn't carry a lot of ammo or supplies. The Bradley, on the other hand, is pretty much the opposite. It is a big target, but it also carries a ton of supplies and ammo, not to mention that the troop compartment is much roomier. I guess what I'm trying to say is this: these dick measuring contests about tanks are pretty dumb, and they never end up going anywhere. Especially with modern tanks, where the designs are pretty homogeneous, and a lot about them is still classified. Just like whatever tanks you think are cool. That sums up everything I wanted to say. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one.